The final notice was 3 pages long, and Earth read all of it aloud. That was the first thing the galaxy found funny. The assembly of sovereign peoples met in the hollow heart of Meridian Kell, a station older than most of the species inside it, a shell of gray stone and grown coral that had been drifting in the dark between 4 suns since, before humanity had learned to smelt iron. Its great chamber was a bowl of tiered galleries, 900 delegations arranged in rings, and at the bottom of the bowl there was a floor of black glass where a speaker could stand and be seen by every eye at once. There were a great many kinds of eyes. Some of them did not blink. Some of them did not close ever and had to be shielded by hoods and filters. Some of them were not eyes at all but organs of sense that human science had never fully catalogued, because the species that owned them had never permitted a human to look closely. Ambassador Theodora Wexley walked out onto the black glass at the appointed hour, alone, carrying a folder made of paper. Paper, that too was funny. The galleries murmured with the particular dry chuckle of beings who had long ago digitized their memories, their laws, their gods. The Terran delegation still brought paper to the assembly, still printed its statements, still signed them with ink, and the joke among the older powers was that humanity clung to paper the way a drowning creature clings to driftwood, not because it floats well, but because it is the only thing it has ever held. Wexley was 61 years old, small, gray, unhurried. She set the folder on the lectern. She looked up at the rings of light and eyes above her, and she waited until the murmuring had run itself out, and then she waited a little longer until the silence had gone from courteous to uncomfortable. "The government of Earth and her territories," she said, "issues this notice under Article 9 of the Concord Charter, which permits any signatory to declare a condition of terminal grievance. This notice is final. It will not be repeated, amended, softened, or withdrawn. Earth requests that the Assembly record the time and date of its reading." The clerk of the Assembly, a many-jointed Ilthan who had held the office for 200 years, recorded the time and date in the tone of a being noting the arrival of a delivery it had not ordered. Wexley began to read. She read the list first. It took 11 minutes. It was a list of ships, freighters, tenders, colony barges, medical transports, ore haulers, 3 survey vessels, a school ship. Each entry had a name, a registry number, a crew complement, a date, a set of coordinates, and a disposition. Most of the dispositions were the same word. Lost. She read the list of worlds next, 6 of them. Human colonies on the far side of the Halcyon Reach, worlds that had been settled under Concord license, with Concord seals stamped on their charters and Concord surveyors' signatures on their soil samples. 4 of the 6 were now under the administration of the Draeven Ascendancy, which had arrived with hospital ships and engineers and a great deal of paperwork, and which had explained, patiently in the assembly, that the human settlements had been in violation of navigational statutes, and that the Ascendancy had merely assumed the burden of correcting them. The 2 remaining worlds had been evacuated under duress. Their populations were still living in transit hulls in orbit around a gas giant, eating recycled protein, waiting for a ruling that had been pending for 9 years. She read the list of dead. That took the longest. She did not read every name. There were 14,311 names, but she read the first 100, and then she said, "The remainder are appended," and set that page aside, and the sound of the paper moving was very loud in the bowl. Then she read the notice itself. "Earth has kept its treaties," Wexley said. "Earth has kept them when they cost us. Earth has submitted 41 formal complaints to this assembly over 63 years, and has abided by every ruling, including the 11 rulings that found against us on evidence we knew to be fabricated. Earth has allowed its vessels to be boarded, its cargoes seized, its crews detained, its colonies annexed, its citizens killed, and Earth has answered every one of these things with words, in this chamber, in the manner prescribed by law. Earth wishes the Assembly to understand what that has been. It has not been weakness. It has not been incapacity. It has been a choice, renewed every year by every human government against considerable pressure from our own people. It has been restraint, and restraint is a thing that can be spent. Ours is spent. Therefore, Earth declares that the Draeven ascendancy has, by its conduct, placed itself in a state of terminal grievance with the human species. Earth demands the following, in full, without negotiation: the immediate withdrawal of all ascendancy forces from the 6 named worlds, the return of all detained human nationals, living and dead, the surrender of the officers named in the appendix for trial before a conquered tribunal, and reparation, at a schedule attached, to the families of the 14,311. Earth sets a deadline, 90 standard days from the reading of this notice. Earth attaches no conditions to that deadline, offers no extension of it, and will entertain no discussion of it. If, at the expiry of 90 days, these demands have not been met in full, Earth will cease to exercise restraint. That is the whole of the notice. Earth asks the Assembly to consider carefully what the second half of that sentence contains, because Earth will not be explaining it again. She closed the folder. And the galaxy, in its 900 delegations, in its rings of light, did what it had done for 63 years. It shrugged. Not all at once, and not unkindly, and that was the part that would be studied afterward by historians of 4 species. There was no jeering. There was no contempt in the vulgar sense. There was simply the vast, warm, unbothered indifference of an old civilization hearing a small one say something dramatic. The Kessin Guild's delegate offered a formal expression of sympathy for human losses and moved that the matter be referred to the Committee on Frontier Standards, which had a backlog of 40 years. The Ilthan choir sang 2 bars of a condolence and abstained. The Marosept, who had eaten 3 species and been forgiven for it, made a joke in a language that did not translate, and the galleries laughed the way people laugh at a joke told by a rich neighbor. And the Draeven envoy, Submarshal Sarek Val, rose in his high box, wearing the pale scale armor of his rank, and did not even bother to come down to the floor. "The ascendancy notes the human statement," he said. "The ascendancy notes in particular its length." The laughter that time was louder. "We are asked to consider what lies inside the phrase 'cease to exercise restraint.' Very well, we have considered it. The ascendancy maintains 4,000 ships of the line. The human species maintains 116, of which perhaps 40 could survive contact with a Draeven picket. We have counted them. We have counted their yards, their drives, their reactors, their mines. We know what humanity has, because humanity has been very careful to show us, for 60 years, in customs declarations and inspection reports and open registry filings, like a child emptying its pockets at a checkpoint." He spread his hands. It was almost gentle. "The ascendancy does not doubt human courage. The ascendancy doubts human arithmetic. And so the ascendancy will make no withdrawal, return no prisoners, surrender no officers, and pay no reparations. Not in 90 days, not in 90 years. He paused, and the pause was the only thing in the whole chamber that would later be quoted with real bitterness. "Ambassador," he said, "you have given us a deadline. Out of respect for the effort you have plainly put into your document, I will give you one in return. Do not come back to this chamber to read us your feelings again." Teodora Wexley stood on the black glass and let the laughter wash over her, and did not flinch, and did not answer. She picked up her folder, she turned. She walked out of the bowl and up the grand stair, 91 steps past the galleries, past the delegations, past 900 species who watched her go with the mild attention one gives to weather. She did not hurry. The recording of that walk would be watched in the years that followed, more than any other recording in the archives of 400 worlds, and every viewer would notice the same thing eventually, and every viewer would find that it did something cold to the back of the neck. She was not upset. She looked, if anything, relieved. 6,000 light-years from Meridian Kell, at the pale edge of the Halcyon Reach, the Terran picket ship Forbearance was being boarded for the 9th time that year. Lieutenant Commander Mira Kovan stood at the inner airlock with her hands loose at her sides, and her sidearm locked in the arms cabinet 3 decks below, because that was the protocol, and watched the Draeven inspection party come through her ship like weather through an open window. She was 26 years old. She had a narrow, tired, watchful face, dark hair cut close at the sides because the pressure hoods chafed otherwise, and a habit noted in 3 separate fitness reports, always approvingly, always in a slightly worried tone, of standing very still when she was angry. She had been in the Terran Deterrent Command for 7 years. She had been aboard Forbearance for 2. In that time she had been boarded 23 times, had her cargo manifests rewritten 14 times, had her ship's drive fuel sampled, until it was 2/3 gone, and she had to limp home on thruster mass, and had been required on each occasion to sign a docket thanking the Ascendancy for its diligence. The docket was in her hand now. The Draeven boarding officer was young, for a Draeven barely into his 2nd scaling, the ridge over his eyes still soft, and he had 4 troopers with him and a scanning drone that hummed as it stripped the ship's manifest and copied it, uninvited, into Ascendancy records. He walked the corridor slowly. He touched things. He opened a locker, looked inside, and let the door swing. "Your reactor certification is expired," he said. "It expires in 4 months, Mira said. "That is expired on a schedule." "Yes, sir." Her voice was flat and pleasant. "Everything is." He looked at her for a moment, deciding whether that was insolence, and decided, as they always decided, that it was not worth the paperwork. Forbearance was a small ship, 1,100 tons, a crew of 31, a hull built for endurance and not for anything else. Her role in the Halcyon Reach was to sit in the dark at the mouth of the Sejna corridor and watch the evacuation lanes and radio home if anything went wrong, and she had been doing it for 2 years with the fastidious, humiliating patience of a species under orders. Every ship in the Terran Deterrent Command carried a name from the same list: Forbearance, Long Patience, Second Thought, Cold Counsel, Temperance, Measure Twice, 116 ships of the line, and each one named for the act of not doing something. Her captain had explained it to her once on her first watch aboard. In the way of a woman explaining a family shame she had decided not to be ashamed of. Captain Sable Adaro was 54, broad-shouldered, with a voice like gravel in a bucket, and 40 years of frontier service in her joints. She came down the corridor now with her hands folded behind her back, and the Draeven boarding officer straightened slightly, because even a Draeven could tell the difference between rank and command. "Officer Kesh," Adaro said, "your drone is in my chapel." "Your what?" "Compartment 19. It is a chapel. It has no cargo in it and no equipment in it and nothing in it at all but a bench and a light, and your drone is in it, scanning the bench. Regulations require you to inspect cargo. There is no cargo in compartment 19. There is a bench." Adaro's voice did not rise. It never rose. "Recall your drone or I will put my hand on it, and then we will both have to write a report, and mine will be longer." The young Draeven officer's crest flattened. For 1/2 second, something ugly moved behind his eyes, the reflex of a species that had never, in 800 years, been told no by anything smaller than itself. Then he laughed. He actually laughed, a wet clicking sound, and made a gesture, and the drone came humming back down the corridor and settled at his shoulder like a trained bird. "Sign the docket," he said. Mira signed the docket. They watched the Draeven cutter uncouple and burn away, a bright hard star shrinking into the dust of the Reach, and neither of them spoke until it was gone. 90 days, Mira said at last. Adaro said nothing. The assembly recording came in on the last packet. The whole ship seen it. They laughed at her, Captain. They sat there and they laughed at her, and then the Draeven told her not to come back. I saw it. 90 days and then Earth ceases to exercise restraint. Mira turned. Her hands at her sides were very still. With what, Captain, with what? We have 116 hulls. 40 of them are like this one. We build one destroyer every 3 years because that's all the conquered tonnage cap allows, and we've never once broken the cap. Not once. We've never even been accused of it. We're the only signatory in the whole assembly with a perfect compliance record, and everyone knows it. That's the joke. That's the actual joke they tell about us. Kovan. So what does she mean? Mira's voice did not rise either. That was the thing about her that made people watch her carefully. What does Wexley mean when she says that? Because the Draeven heard it and they laughed, and I watched it 4 times. And Captain, I couldn't tell them they were wrong. Sable Adaro stood at the viewport with her hands behind her back and looked out at the dust and the far cold suns of the Halcyon Reach for a long moment. When you were 16, she said, what did they teach you about the Kassan intervention? Mira blinked. That we stayed out of it, that the conquered asked for auxiliaries and Earth declined and paid the fine. That's what they teach. That's what's true. Adaro's reflection in the glass was patient and old and entirely unreadable. Do you know what the fine was? No. 400 billion, payable over 90 years. Earth paid it in 11 in cash, and nobody ever asked how a species with 1 shipyard and a compliance record found 400 billion in 11 years, because nobody in this galaxy has ever once been curious about us. She turned from the glass. Kovan, in 7 years of service, has anyone ever told you what happens to a human warship when it's decommissioned? It's broken up, scrapped at Luna or Ceres. The tonnage is logged and the hull number is retired, and the conquered observers countersign it. They countersign it, Adaro agreed. They watch the tonnage go into the furnace. And do you know what the conquered observers have never asked in 63 years, not one single time? Mira waited. They have never asked what comes out of the furnace, Adaro said. She let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to. You've served under me 2 years and you've never asked me why I'm out here, she went on. A captain with my time engraved on a picket boat at the ass end of the Reach, signing dockets for children in scale armor. Everyone assumes I did something. She smiled, and it was not a nice smile, and it was not directed at Mira. I asked for this posting, Lieutenant Commander. I asked for it in writing, and I have asked to have it renewed every year for 6 years. And every year somebody at Deterrent Command signs the request, because somebody at Deterrent Command wants an officer of my particular experience sitting at the mouth of the Sejuna corridor with her eyes open when the 90 days run out. Captain, 81 days left, Adaro said. Get some sleep, Kovan, you'll want it. She walked away down the corridor of a ship named for not doing something, past the chapel with its bench and its light. And she was, Mira noticed, humming. It was the first time Mira Kovan had ever heard her captain hum. She would think about that sound for the rest of her life. The deadline expired at 400 ships' time on a Tuesday, and nothing happened. That was the strangest week of Mira Kovan's life. The 90 days ran out and the galaxy did not change. The assembly did not convene. The ascendancy did not withdraw from a single world. The Ilthan choir released a statement expressing measured optimism that the human position would soften. On the Draeven trade networks, a comedian did a routine about a species that measured its threats in pages, and it was very popular, and somebody translated it into standard, and it circulated on human ships too, because human crews have always had a sour appetite for the jokes told about them. And Earth said nothing at all. No ultimatum, no follow-up, no angry statement of protest, no request for an emergency session, no appeal to the Committee on Frontier Standards. The Terran delegation on Meridian Kel simply stopped attending. Their gallery sat empty in the rings of light, a small dark gap like a missing tooth, and after the first few days people stopped looking at it. The deterrent command sent no new orders. Forbearance sat at the mouth of the Sejuna corridor and watched the evacuation lanes, and the crew did their watches and cleaned their filters and lost at cards and grew, day by day, into a silence that Mira did not know how to name. On the 11th day after the deadline, the convoy came through. It was not a military convoy. It was the last of the Sejuna lift, 9,000 human colonists from the two worlds that had been evacuated under duress, transferred at last from their 9-year exile in the transit hulls to a resettlement grant 3 jumps coreward. They came through the corridor in 7 old ships, unarmed, transponders screaming their civilian status in every protocol the Conquered had ever written, escorted by 4 Terran vessels. Long Patience, Second Thought, Measure Twice, and the destroyer Cold Council, which was the largest warship humanity had ever been permitted to build and which massed less than a Draeven light cruiser. Forbearance took station at the rear. Mira had the bridge watch. She remembered afterward with a clarity that never faded that she had been thinking about a woman on the 3rd barge who had come up on the common channel an hour earlier to ask whether the resettlement world had rain. Not weather. Rain, specifically. The woman had been 9 years in a transit hull with a recycled sky, and she had wanted to know if her son, who had been born in it, would see rain. Mira had told her yes. She had looked it up first to be sure. The Draeven squadron came out of the dust at 11:47. They came in the standard ascendancy interdiction pattern, 12 ships, 3 of them heavy, spreading across the corridor mouth with the leisurely confidence of a hand closing on a moth. They did not fire. They did not need to. Submarshal Sarek Val's flag was on the lead cruiser. Mira saw the transponder and felt something turn over in her chest, because it meant this was not a patrol, this was not a coincidence. This was a man who had flown 6,000 light years to be personally present. The hail came in on open channel, unencrypted, broadcast wide enough that every ship in the Reach would hear it, and every listening post, and every relay all the way back to the assembly. Terran convoy, your vessels are in violation of navigational statute. You will heave to for inspection and reassignment of cargo. Cargo. Captain Adaro came onto the bridge in her shirt sleeves, still fastening her collar, and stood at the command rail and looked at the plot for 11 seconds without saying anything. Reassignment of cargo, Cold Council's captain said on the fleet channel, and his voice was not steady. They're calling them cargo. Hold formation, Adaro said. They mean to take them, 9,000 people, they mean to take them back. Hold formation, Havorson. What happened next took 22 minutes, and it was recorded from 9 angles, and every human being alive would eventually see it. Cold Council put herself between the Draeven line and the barges. She did not fire. She simply moved. 400,000 tons of the finest ship humanity had ever been allowed, and interposed her hull, and Captain Havorson came up on open channel and read, in a voice that was steady by then, because he had found something to hold on to, the Conquered statutes protecting civilian transit, all 9 of them by number. Sarek Val listened to the whole recitation. Then he opened fire. Mira Kovan watched a destroyer die at 4,000 kilometers. She watched the shields go first, a shell of light that flared and thinned and simply stopped being there. She watched the hull open along the spine like something being unzipped. She watched the fore section tumble away burning, and the aft section hold together long enough for the reactor to lose containment. And then there was a white flare that the viewport dimmed against. And when the dimming lifted, there was nothing in the plot where Cold Council had been but an expanding smear of light. 340 people. Long Patience went in next, because that was the standing order, protect the lift, at all costs, in that priority and second thought with her. And it was not a battle. It was an arithmetic problem being solved in public. Long Patience got a torpedo through a Draeven escort's flank and killed it, and that was the only thing any human ship did that day that could be called a victory, and it cost her everything. Forbearance, Val's voice on the open channel calm as a clerk. Forbearance, you are the last armed vessel. Stand down and withdraw, and I will permit your picket to return home. This is not offered twice. Adaro said, Kovan, sit down. Captain, sit down at the helm and put your hands on the board and listen to me. Mira sat, her hands went to the board. There are 7 barges, Adaro said, and her voice was gravel and iron and absolutely level. And they have a 42-second burn to the corridor throat, and then they're in the dust, and the Draeven can't track them in the dust with those cheap ascendancy sensors, because their engineers cut the aperture on the VHAL pattern arrays in the year 41 to save on tolerances. Which is the kind of thing you learn if you spend 6 years sitting at the ass end of the reach reading ascendancy shipyard filings for a living. The bridge was silent. 42 seconds, Adaro said, so we give them 60. She turned to the comm officer. Open channel, wide as it goes. The light went green. Submarshal Sarek Val, Sable Adaro said. This is Captain Sable Adaro of the Terran vessel Forbearance. You have destroyed 3 warships and killed 912 of my people, and you are presently maneuvering to fire on unarmed civilian transports carrying 9,000 refugees whose homes you took. I am recording. Everyone is recording. And I want you to understand something, because you did not understand it in the assembly, and you will not have another chance to hear it from a human mouth. You were warned. You were warned in writing in public on the record, with dates and coordinates and names, and you laughed, and you told our ambassador not to come back. So she did not come back. And you thought that was the end of it, because in your language, and in the language of every power in that chamber, a threat that is not repeated is a threat that was never meant. That is not our language. Ours is a species that says a thing once. She reached out and put one hand flat on the command rail and looked at the plot and the 12 Draeven ships turning on it. Forbearance ahead flank, bring us across their firing lane, all power to the forward screens. Mira Kovan's hands moved before her mind caught up, because that was what 7 years of training was for. 1,100 tons of picket boat lit her drive and threw herself across the throat of the Sejuna corridor, into the guns of a battle line, with nothing on her hull but a sensor mast, a light cannon, and a name that meant not doing something. They held for 51 seconds. 51 seconds is longer than anyone thinks. It was long enough for the screens to fail. It was long enough for the forward third of the ship to be taken away in a single hit that Mira did not see, only felt, as a hammer through the deck and a sudden roaring silence where the atmosphere had been. It was long enough for Sable Adaro, standing at the command rail, to be struck by a spar of her own bulkhead and driven against the console and killed, immediately without a sound, with her hands still flat on the rail. It was long enough for 7 barges to reach the dust. Mira got Forbearance out on one engine and a hull that whistled. She got her out because the Draeven, having made their point, had lost interest. A picket boat was not worth a torpedo, and their sensors could not find the barges, and Sarek Val had a report to file. She got her out with 9 of 31 alive, and she flew her, personally, for 11 days on a dead-reckoning course through the dust of the Halcyon Reach, with her captain's body in the cold locker, and the recording of 22 minutes locked in 3 separate drives, and she did not sleep more than 90 minutes at a stretch, and she did not weep, not once, and afterward she could not have told anyone what she thought about for 11 days, because the truth was that she did not think about anything at all. She thought about a woman who wanted to know if there was rain. She brought the recording home to a species that was already awake. Mira did not understand that at first. She limped Forbearance into the Sol system expecting sirens, expecting emergency sessions, expecting the shocked scrambling of a civilization that had just lost 3 ships and 900 people to a power 4 times its size. What she found was a solar system that had, quietly, without any announcement whatsoever, been at work for a very long time. She saw it first at the Jovian Trojans, on the long, slow approach, when the traffic control channel, a channel that had carried perhaps 9 transmissions an hour for her entire career, was so saturated that forbearance had to wait 40 minutes for a slot. She saw it in the plot, hundreds of drive plumes where there should have been oar tugs and survey boats, moving in patterns that were not commercial, that were not anything, that were the slow, deliberate braid of a fleet assembling. She saw it finally when the escort came out to meet her. 2 ships. They came out of the dark at a closing velocity that made her helmsman swear, and they matched course with a precision that no human vessel she had ever served on could have managed, and they took station off her bow and her quarter and lit their running lights, and Mira Kovan looked at them on the screen for a long moment and understood that she was looking at something she had been told did not exist. They were big, not Draeven bigger. Long, spare, ugly hulls without an ounce of ornament on them, black as the space they sat in, bristling with launch cells in numbers that made no sense, with drive signatures that read as impossible on Forbearance's instruments, because Forbearance's instruments had never been calibrated for anything that hot. And they had names painted on their flanks, in plain white letters, in standard, in a font like a shipping label. The one off her bow was called Consequence. The one off her quarter was called Full Measure. The hail came in, and it was a young man's voice, tired and courteous. Forbearance, this is Consequence. Welcome home. We have your telemetry, we have your casualty list, and we have a berth for you at Ceres. A pause. Ma'am, Deterrent commands compliments, and they're holding a session for your captain's report. They'd like you to give it in person. Mira Kovan sat in the ruined command chair of a ship named for Restraint, and looked at the 2 impossible vessels flying escort on her wrecked bow, and heard herself say, in a voice she barely recognized, "How many of you are there?" The pause on the channel was longer that time. "Ma'am," Consequence said, "you should probably let them tell you." The session was held 90 meters under the ice of Ceres, in a chamber that did not appear on any station schematic Mira had ever been cleared to see, and there were 40 people in it, and only 9 of them wore uniforms. She gave her report standing. She gave it flatly, without adjectives, for 50 minutes, in the manner she had been taught, what she saw, when she saw it, what was done, by whom, with what result. She named Havorson. She named the 340. She played the 22 minutes on the wall, all of it, including the part where Cold Counsel read the statutes by number, and including the part where her captain said ours is a species that says a thing once, and including the 51 seconds. When it was over, nobody spoke for a while. Then a woman at the far end of the table stood up, and Mira realized she was looking at Teodora Wexley, who had not been seen in public since she walked up 91 steps at Meridian Kell. "Lieutenant Commander," Wexley said, "you are 26 years old." "Yes, ma'am." "You have been asking a question since you got home. Several people have logged it. You have asked it of a berthing officer, a flight surgeon, and a rating in a corridor, and you have not been answered because the answer is classified at a level that does not have a name." Wexley came around the table. She was small and gray and unhurried, exactly as she had been on the black glass. "Ask it here." Mira's hands were very still at her sides. "What is out there?" she said. "In the Trojans, in the belt, what has Earth been building?" "Everything," said Teodora Wexley. And she said it the way a physician says a diagnosis, not with pride, not with relish, but with the particular gentleness of someone delivering news that cannot be taken back. "For 63 years, child. Since the first inspection. Since the first seized freighter and the first countersigned scrap docket and the first ruling that went against us on evidence we knew was forged. Every time we bowed our heads in that chamber, we went home and we built. Every fine we paid in cash, and the cash came out of an economy that was running a shadow at twice the size of the one we showed them. Every warship we broke up under conquered observation, we broke up honestly, and the observers watched the tonnage go into the furnace, and never once in 6 decades did a single one of them ask what came out of it. They counted our hulls. They were very thorough. They have counted our hulls every year and filed the count and slept well. Wexley's mouth moved, not quite a smile. They never counted our foundries. She touched the table and the wall changed. Mira looked at it for a long time. That's the Uat, she said at last. Her voice had gone strange. That is the Uat. Those are, she stopped. She started again. Ma'am, those are shipyards. Those are hundreds of. 4,106 ships of the line, Wexley said. 11 million autonomous strike platforms. 900,000 cataloged targets under continuous track, and the long rain which we will come to and which you will not sleep well after hearing about, and neither do I. She folded her hands. We call it the reserve. Some people call it the ledger, because that is what it is. 63 years of debt, entered line by line, in a book we never once opened. The Assembly has been told for 63 years that humanity is a small species with a perfect compliance record and no appetite for war. That is entirely true. We have no appetite for it. We never developed one. She looked up, and her eyes were the flattest, kindest, most terrible eyes Mira Kovan had ever seen in a human face. We developed a capacity for it instead. Those are not the same thing, and the galaxy has spent 63 years failing to notice the difference, and the bill for that failure is now due. Then why? Mira heard her own voice crack and did not care. Why did we wait? 912 people died at Sejuna. 14,000 before them. If we had this the whole time. Because a warning that you give while your hand is on the trigger is not a warning, Wexley said. It is a threat, and a species that begins with threats never has to learn restraint, and a species that never learns restraint cannot be trusted with what is sitting in the Uat cloud right now. We gave them 63 years of patience so that no one, not them, not the Assembly, not history, and above all not us, could ever say afterward that we had wanted this. She straightened. We spent every hour of it. We spent every legal remedy, every appeal, every courtesy, every last scrap of forbearance we had, down to the empty bottom of the barrel in front of 900 witnesses. And then we told them once exactly what would happen. And they laughed, and they told us not to come back, and then they fired on refugee transports. She let out a slow breath. Sit down, Lieutenant Commander, said Teodora Wexley. There is a fleet in the Uat with no officers who have ever seen a shot fired in anger, and you are the only human being alive who has stood in a Draeven firing lane and lived, and in about 4 minutes I am going to ask you to do something that you are much too young for. They took her out to see it. The transit was 6 days, and Mira Kovan spent most of it at a viewport with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands, because there was nothing else to do, and because the alternative was thinking about a cold locker on a wrecked picket boat. The Uat cloud is not a place. That is the first thing they tell you. It is a statistical smear of ice and rubble a light year deep, so thin that a ship can fly through it for a month without seeing anything, and it had been humanity's backyard for 2 centuries, mapped and catalogued and quietly ignored by every survey the conquered had ever bothered to run, because there was nothing out there worth the fuel. There was, it turned out, a great deal out there. They came up on Forge 9 at a shallow angle so she could see it against the starfield, and the young officer escorting her, a lieutenant named Bex, who had the scrubbed, unlined look of someone who had never been shot at, said nothing at all, which was, Mira thought later, the kindest possible thing he could have done. It was a comet. That was the first impression. A dirty snowball 11 kilometers long, the kind of object that fell through the inner system once every 9,000 years and made the news feeds for a day. Then the light caught it, and it was not a comet because comets do not have gantries. The ice was a shell. Underneath, through the great open canyons cut into it, Mira saw the interior of a shipyard the size of a mountain range, lattices of scaffold and hard light containment, refinery towers glowing sullen red, tugs the size of cathedrals moving hull sections that no human eye had ever been meant to see. She saw a spine under construction, 2,000 meters of it, with the ribs going on. She saw a finished ship being walked out of its cradle by handling frames, black and spare and ugly, exactly like Consequence, exactly like Full Measure. And behind it in the dark there was another, and the dock lights went back and back until they were a haze. And beyond Forge 9 there was Forge 10, 3 million kilometers on, a second smear of light in the black. And beyond that 11. "How many forges?" Mira said. 41, ma'am, said Lieutenant Bex. She drank her cold coffee. Her hand was steady. She had noticed in a distant way that her hands had been very steady since Sejuna. "They watched us break up our ships," she said, "for 60 years. They stood at the furnace and watched the tonnage go in." "Yes, ma'am. And it came out here." "Some of it, ma'am. Most of it we mined." Bex hesitated, and then, with the terrible earnestness of a young man who has grown up inside a secret, he added, "The scrapping was never really about the metal. It was about the observers. We wanted them to keep coming to the furnace every year. We wanted them to have something to write down." Mira Kovan looked at 41 shipyards hidden inside a light year of ice, and thought about a Draeven officer's drone humming in a chapel with a bench in it, and understood that she was living inside the largest and most patient act of misdirection in the recorded history of the galaxy, and that it had been built, brick by brick, out of humiliations that she had personally signed for. 23 dockets, she had signed 23 of them. "Ma'am," Beck said after a while, "are you all right?" "No," said Mira. The doctrine had a name, and the name was on the first page of the operational order, in plain letters, without decoration. "Everything once." They gave her a room to read it in, and a chair, and 11 hours, and nobody interrupted her, and when she came out she was a different officer than the one who had gone in. The doctrine was not what she expected. She had expected a war plan. It was not a war plan. It was, she realized about 2 hours in, a set of restraints, a document written by people who were terrified of themselves, and who had spent 6 decades building a machine so large that the only thing standing between the galaxy and a catastrophe was the quality of the leash they could design for it. Everything meant everything. It meant the 4,000 ships and the 11 million platforms and the long reign. It meant that Earth would commit her entire capacity in a single, simultaneous, unrecallable stroke, with no reserve held back, no phased escalation, no graduated response. Because graduated response, the doctrine argued in a passage that Mira read 4 times, is a way of asking your enemy to please stop, and Earth had already asked. Once meant once, one war, one campaign, executed to its end and then stopped absolutely at a defined line with the machine put back to sleep and never ever repeated. The doctrine's authors had written a whole chapter on why a species that fights a total war twice, it said, is no longer a species that fights total wars. It is a species that is one. And then there were the rules of fire, and they were 17 pages long, and Mira read them with her jaw clenched so hard that her teeth ached for a day. Rule 1. The war is against the war machine. Targets are fleets in being, shipyards and drive forges, military logistics, command citadels, the persons of the Ascendancy High Command who are lawful combatants by their own published doctrine. Nothing else is a target. Nothing else will become a target. There will be no exceptions granted for any reason at any level of command, at any point in the campaign, including in retaliation for enemy conduct. Rule 2. Population centers are not targets. Agricultural systems are not targets. Water, atmosphere, biosphere, orbital habitats, Hospitals, schools, civil traffic, and the Draeven homeworld surface are not targets. Any weapon that cannot be guaranteed to discriminate will not be employed, regardless of its military value, and there are 3 such weapons in the inventory, and they will remain in their silos, and after the war they will be destroyed, and this paragraph is not subject to review. Rule 3. Every fixed target of military character will receive a warning of not less than 72 hours, transmitted in clear, in the Ascendancy's own tongue, on the Ascendancy's own emergency channels, identifying the target, the hour of the strike, and the evacuation radius. Mira stopped there and put the order down on the table, and stared at the wall of a briefing room 90 meters under Ceres ice. 72 hours. She was a picket officer. She had flown 2 years in a ship with 1 gun. She had run the numbers before she was aware of running them, and the numbers were obscene. 72 hours of warning was 72 hours for a Draeven shipyard to disperse its ships, arm its defenses, mine its approaches, and call in every squadron within 3 jumps. 72 hours turned a surprise into a battle. Battles cost hulls. Battles cost crews. Battles cost people like Sable Adero, whose hand had been flat on the command rail. She found herself standing without having decided to stand. She found herself out in the corridor. She found Teodora Wexley in a small room at the end of it, drinking tea, alone, as though she had been waiting. Rule 3, Mira said. Yes. Ma'am, Rule 3 will kill our own people, thousands of them. Every yard we hit will be waiting for us with everything it has because we told it we were coming. Her voice was flat and pleasant and absolutely level, which was what her voice did when she was angry, and Wexley, who had read her file, noted it. We have the biggest fleet in the galaxy sitting in the ice, and we're going to walk it into prepared defenses, deliberately, over and over. For 72 hours of courtesy to people who fired on refugee barges. Yes, said Teodora Wexley. That is precisely what we are going to do. Why? Sit down, Lieutenant Commander. Mira did not sit down. The Draeven yards are inside their cities, Wexley said. Not near them. Inside them. Vihal Doran's orbital forge is ringed by 9 million people in habitat towers, because the Ascendancy has never in its history had to consider what happens if someone shoots back, and so they built their war industry in the middle of their homes, the way you might build a workshop in a kitchen. She turned her cup slowly on the table. We can hit that forge without the warning. We can hit it clean and fast, and we would lose perhaps 40 ships instead of 400, and the debris cascade from an unwarned strike at that altitude would come down through those towers for 6 weeks. Then we hit it and we accept. Say the rest of that sentence. Mira's mouth closed. Say it, Wexley said without cruelty. You were going to say we accept the collateral. Say the number then. It is 1.4 million. Say it and hear it in your own voice, and then decide whether you still want to be the officer who said it. The room was very quiet. They killed 912 of ours, Mira said at last, and 14,000 before that. And they did it on purpose, and they laughed. Yes. And we're going to give them 72 hours. Yes. Why? And her voice was not level anymore. Wexley set down the cup. Because we have 4,000 ships and 11 million drones and a weapon in flight that I will tell you about tomorrow, and that will not let you sleep, she said. And the only thing, child, in the entire physical universe that now stands between the Draeven civil population and extinction is a piece of paper that says we will not. That is all there is. There is no power that can stop us. There is no coalition that can restrain us. There is no God that will intervene. There is a document, and there is our willingness to obey it when obeying it costs us our sons. That is what restraint is, not the inability to strike. Anyone can be restrained by weakness. That is not a virtue, that is a fact of arithmetic, and the galaxy has spent 63 years mistaking our arithmetic for our character. She stood slowly, and she was small and gray and unhurried, and Mira felt the room tilt around her. In 90 days they will find out that they had it backwards. And on that day, the entire galaxy will be looking at the human species and asking one question, and it will not be can they. It will be will they stop. And every human being who fires a shot in this war is going to be the answer to that question, including you, especially you. Mira Kovan stood in a small room under the ice and found that her hands were not steady after all. It will cost us, she said. It will cost us everything we can afford, said Teodora Wexley, and we will pay it, and we will not be gleeful about it, and we will not be forgiven for it, and we will do it anyway. That is the whole of the doctrine. The rest is engineering. They gave her a ship 4 days later. She had expected a division. She had expected at the outside a squadron staff billet, some safe advisory corner where they could keep the only officer who had ever survived a Draeven firing lane, and mine her for what she knew and keep her out of the way. Instead, a rear admiral she had never met handed her an orders chit and said, "Ninth line, second element TDS consequence. She's yours. Your breveted commander as of this morning, and the paperwork says provisional. And you should understand that the word provisional in this Navy currently means nothing at all." Mira looked at the chit for a long moment. "Sir," she said, "I'm 26. "Yes," the admiral said. "So is nearly everyone. Commander, we built 4,000 ships in the dark, and we could not train 4,000 crews in the dark, because you cannot hide the training. So we built simulators, and we filled them with children, and we ran them for 15 years, and we told them it was a game, and we told their parents it was a scholarship program. And we have this morning informed 110,000 young men and women that the game was not a game." He did not smile. He looked, in fact, ill. The average age of a human line officer is 24 years and 7 months. The average age of a Draeven line officer is 190. They will call us a fleet of children. They will be entirely correct. He held out the chit again. "You are not being given a ship because you are ready. You are being given a ship because you are the only human alive who has seen what they do, and because when 100,000 frightened kids ask what a Draeven cruiser looks like when it kills your captain, somebody has to be able to answer them without lying." Mira took the chit. "What's my element's assignment?" she said. The admiral's jaw worked. "Vihal Doran," he said, "you're the warning ship commander. The 9th goes in first and broadcasts Rule 3 in clear on their own emergency channels, 72 hours before the strike arrives, and then you hold station in the target volume for the entire 72 hours, so that they know we mean it, and so that they cannot claim afterward that they never received it, and so that every civilian in those 9 million towers has 3 days to walk out of the blast radius." He met her eyes. "You'll be alone. You'll be in the middle of their home system with the whole Vihal Doran garrison on top of you and their reinforcements inbound. And your orders are to endure and not to fire first, and to stay until the clock runs out. Casualty projection for the 9th line is 61%. Mira Kovan stood very still. Behind her eyes, without permission, there was a captain's hand flat on a command rail, and 51 seconds, and a woman on a barge asking whether the world she was going to would have rain. "Sir," she said, "does Consequence have a chapel?" The admiral blinked. "A what?" "Compartment 19 on the old picket hulls. A bench and a light. It isn't in the specs. The yard crews put them in anyway." Her voice was flat and pleasant and level. "If she hasn't got one, I'd like to have one cut before we sail." The admiral looked at her for a long moment. "Cut 2, he said. The long rain had been falling for 31 years. Wexley told her about it on the last night, in the officers' mess of a ship that had never carried an officer, over a meal neither of them ate. "It is not a weapon," the ambassador said, "in the sense that you are used to. It is not built and then fired. It is only mailed. 31 years ago, quietly, without announcement, A series of unremarkable civilian mass driver installations in the asteroid belt had begun to run at a slightly higher duty cycle than their filings suggested. What they threw was not spectacular. Slugs of nickel iron, 2 tons apiece, machined smooth, unpowered, cold, painted in an absorptive black that made them almost impossible to see against the deep sky. Each one carried a small, dumb, solar-powered brain, and a set of chemical thrusters with enough delta V for course corrections measured in centimeters per second. They were fired on trajectories that went nowhere. That was the point. Each slug was launched onto a path that would take it, over decades, through empty space in the general direction of the Draeven Ascendancy's core systems, drifting at a fraction of light speed, dark and silent and utterly unremarkable, 1 grain of iron in a galaxy full of grains. 900,000 of them, Wexley said. Give or take. The oldest were mailed before you were born. They have been coasting through the dark for 3 decades with their little brains asleep, listening on one frequency for one signal. And when they get it, Mira said, they wake and they burn what thruster they have, and they refine. And a 2-ton slug of nickel iron traveling at 11% of light does not need a warhead, Commander. It does not need anything at all. It only needs to arrive. Wexley turned her cup on the table. There is no defense, not because Draeven point defense is poor, it is excellent, but because you cannot shoot down a rain that has been falling toward you for 31 years and is already inside the room. Their sensors will see the burns. They will have 11 minutes. Mira was quiet for a long moment. How do we aim something we fired 30 years ago at a shipyard that didn't exist yet? We don't. Wexley's mouth moved. The slugs aim themselves. Terminal guidance is optical. Each one is looking for a specific silhouette against a specific background, and it has been carrying the pattern in its little head since the day we posted it, and it has been updated 11 times by relay since. They will hit the yards and the orbital forges and the fleet anchorages and the drive works at Kel Sharon, and they will hit nothing else, because a rock with a camera in it cannot be talked into hating anyone. And Rule 3, Mira said, applies to the rain as well as the fleet. That is what makes it a war and not a massacre, and it is why you are going to VHAL Doran, and it is why 61% of the 9th line is not coming home. Wexley pushed her untouched plate away. The rain will pass through the Draeven core in 11 days. If we say nothing, it will take out their entire war industry in one stroke, in 11 minutes, and their fleet will still be in dock, and the war will be over before it begins, and about 2 million civilians will die under the debris and the fires. So we will tell them. We will tell them where and when, and they will empty their yards and scatter their fleet and evacuate their towers, and the rain will fall on empty scaffolding and half-built hulls. And then we will have to fight their fleet in open space, ship to ship, for a year, and it will cost us tens of thousands of children. That is the trade. Somebody made it on paper in a room years ago. Their name is on the page. They will carry it to their grave. She looked up. It was mine, Commander. I want you to hear that from me and not from a historian. The 9th line came out of transit at the edge of the VHAL Doran system at 300 local, in a formation so tight and so silent that the outer picket did not see them for 6 minutes. 9 ships, that was all. 9 black, spare, ugly hulls with white shipping label letters on their flanks, sitting in the dark at the mouth of the most heavily defended star system in the Ascendancy, and behind them, 400 light-years away, 4,000 more waiting for a signal that Mira Kovan would give. VHAL Doran filled the forward screen. It was beautiful, and Mira had not been ready for that. A blue-green world under a white cloud lace, ringed with 9 million lives in towers of habitat glass, and threaded through them, woven into them, tangled up in them like wire in a nest. The vast, bright industrial spine of the Ascendancy's greatest forge, 140 kilometers of scaffold and slipway and reactor bloom, with the half-built hulls of 40 warships hanging in it like fruit. Her hands were steady on the arms of the command chair. "Comms," she said. "Broadcast Rule 3. Their emergency channels, their language, all bands, maximum power, loop it." "Aye, ma'am." And Consequence began to speak. The message ran 2 minutes. It gave the target, the Vihal-Doran orbital forge, the 4 fleet anchorages, and the reactor complex at Kel Sharon by name, by grid, by orbital element. It gave the hour, 72 hours from the first word. It gave the evacuation radius in kilometers with a map. It said, in the Ascendancy's own tongue, in a flat human voice that had been recorded by a translator in a booth on Ceres. "This is a warning under Terran Rule 3. It is not a negotiation and it is not a bluff. At the stated hour, the stated targets will be destroyed. No population center is a target. No habitat is a target. No hospital, school, farm, or civil vessel is a target. Move away from the stated targets. Take your families with you. You have 72 hours. This message will repeat." And then, because someone on Ceres had understood something about how species listen to each other, it added one line that was not in the operational order, and that Mira had approved herself, and that would be argued about for 100 years. "We are aware that you did not give us this courtesy. We are giving it anyway. That is the difference, and we would like you to survive to remember it." For 11 hours, the Ascendancy did nothing. For 11 hours, Mira Kovan sat in the dark at the edge of a hostile system with 9 ships and a message on loop, and watched the Draeven fleet sit at anchor, and understood with a slow, crawling horror that they did not believe it. It was Sub-Marshal Sarek Val who finally answered, Val, who had come home from the Halcyon Reach to a promotion, and he did not answer on a private channel. He answered publicly to the whole system, and the 9th received it as an intercept. "Citizens of Vihal-Doran, you have heard a human broadcast. You will disregard it. The human species possesses 116 warships, of which 9 are presently in our outer system engaged in an active theater. There is no fleet. There is no rain. There is nothing behind this but the same paper that has been shaken at us for 60 years by a species that cannot afford a second shipyard. Remain in your homes. Remain at your posts. The forge will not halt production. Any citizen who abandons a workstation will be recorded." And to the human commander, whoever she is, "You have 71 hours to leave my system. I do not require the whole of them." Mira listened to it twice. Then she keyed the fleet channel, 9 ships, 612 people, average age 24 years and 7 months, and found that her voice was flat and pleasant and absolutely level. "9th line, this is Consequence. Hold station. Weapons tight, screens up. A breath. They've been told. Now we make sure they're told 100 more times, and we stand here in front of them while we do it, so that not one being in that system can ever say afterward that nobody warned them. They'll come for us, let them. Every hour we hold is an hour those towers empty. That's the job. That's the whole job." She looked at the plot, at the beautiful blue-green world and the bright spine of steel wound through 9 million lives. Somebody down there is deciding right now whether to believe a stranger who has no reason to tell them the truth. Let's make it easy for them. The Vihal-Doran garrison came out at hour 14. It was not a battle. It was a siege in reverse. 9 ships holding a fixed point in space while 111 came at them in waves, and the only orders were hold and do not pursue and stay on the broadcast. And so the 9th line did the hardest thing a warship can be asked to do, which is to stand still and be hit. It lasted 58 hours. Mira Kovan fought her ship for 2.5 days with 3 hours of sleep. She learned what Consequence was in those hours, and what the 63 years in the ice had bought. The screens held against fire that would have vaporized cold counsel in a heartbeat. The launch cells emptied and refilled from magazines that seemed to have no bottom. The autonomous platforms, the wasps, the crews called them, 10,000 of them per ship, each the size of a coffin and utterly without fear, went out in clouds and came back thinned and went out again. A Draeven cruiser that had killed 340 people in 11 seconds at Sejuna took consequences full broadside at 9,000 kilometers and came apart like a dropped plate. Mira did not feel triumph. She noted distantly that she was waiting to feel it, and that it did not come, and that this was probably important. She lost full measure at hour 19 with all hands. She lost never again at hour 31 and got 60 of her crew off and watched the rest go up. She lost reckoning and weights and measures in the same 11 minutes at hour 44, when the Ascendancy brought up their heavy line and simply walked it into her. And for a while after that, Mira Kovan stopped being a person and became a set of decisions, one after another, each one made in about 4 seconds, each one costing something she would count later. At hour 51, with 4 ships left in consequence venting from 3 decks, her tactical officer, a boy of 22 named Arrow Senek, whose hands were burned and who had not mentioned it, said, in a small voice, "Ma'am, they're evacuation traffic." "Show me." The plot bloomed with contacts, thousands of them, tens of thousands. Civil shuttles, ferries, or lighters, private craft, atmosphere hoppers never meant to leave the sky, pouring up out of Vihal Doran's habitat towers and away from the great bright spine of the forge in a torrent that filled the orbital lanes for 100,000 kilometers. They had believed. Somewhere down there, at some point in 51 hours, some ordinary Draeven, a shift supervisor, a tower warden, a mother with a workstation record she was about to abandon, had looked at the broadcast and looked at their submarshal's assurances and made a choice. "Ma'am," Senek said, "they're moving, they're actually," his voice cracked, he was 22, "Ma'am, they're getting out." Mira looked at the swarm of fleeing civil craft on her plot, and at the 4 ships she had left out of 9, and at the casualty board where the number was 391, and did the sum that the ambassador had done years ago on paper in a room. "Comms," she said, "widen the evacuation corridor advisory. Give them the lanes we've cleared, and tell the garrison," she stopped. Started again. "Tell the garrison that any vessel carrying civilians out of the strike volume will not be fired on by us, including armed vessels, including their own warships if they are carrying evacuees. Broadcasted in clear." Her executive officer turned. "Ma'am, they'll use that. They'll load troops on civil hulls and walk them right through us." "Yes," Mira said, "they will. Then some of us will die of it." She did not raise her voice. She never raised her voice. "Log my order, Commander. Log it with my name on it. And then get the wasps out of the corridor so nobody's kid gets shot by a machine." They held for 58 hours. At hour 71, what was left of the 9th line, 3 ships, 409 people alive out of 612, turned away from Vihal Doran and burned for the outer dark, and Mira Kovan sent, on the Ascendancy's own emergency channels, the last line of the broadcast. 1 hour. Then she sat in her command chair, in the smell of scorched insulation, with her hands very still, and watched the sky behind them. The long rain arrived at 1100 local. There was no warning, because there was nothing to warn of. The slugs came in dark and cold and silent at 11% of the speed of light, and the first thing anyone in the Vihal Doran system knew was that the sky above their world had turned white. The forge died in 90 seconds. 140 kilometers of scaffold and slipway, 40 half-built warships in their cradles, 9 reactor blooms, 4 fleet anchorages, the drive works at Kel Sharon. It all simply ceased, hammered flat by a rain that had been posted from an asteroid belt 3 decades before any of the beings watching it had been born. The flashes were bright enough to cast shadows on the ground. The debris burned in the upper atmosphere for 6 days, and it was said afterward, by Draeven who were there, that the sky over the evacuated towers looked like the underside of a hot iron. The towers were empty, almost all of them. 11,000 had stayed at their posts and died because they had been told to and because a sub-marshal had recorded their names. 9 million were alive. Aboard Consequence, 409 young men and women watched the light of the long rain come up over a world they had crippled and had not touched, and nobody cheered. Arrow Senek, 22, with his burned hands in his lap, said quietly, "Is that it? Is that what we've been sitting on?" "Some of it," Mira said. "There's more." She thought of 41 shipyards inside a light year of ice, and 4,000 hulls, and 11 million wasps, and 3 weapons in silos that would never be fired and would be destroyed afterward, because a paragraph in a document said so. "There's all of it," said Commander Mira Kovan. "Signal Earth. Tell them Vihal Doran is warned, struck, and clear of civilians, and tell them the 9th line has done its part." She stood up out of the chair, and her legs held barely. "And then tell them to come." They came. The galaxy would spend a century trying to describe what it was like, and the descriptions never worked, because the thing about the human commitment was not its violence. It was its arithmetic. It was the fact that it arrived all at once. 4,106 ships of the line came out of transit into 11 Draeven systems in the same 3-hour window, and behind them came 11 million autonomous platforms. And behind those came the tenders and the yard ships and the hospital hulls. And behind all of it, still coasting silent through the dark from a launch 3 decades old, came the rest of the long rain. There was no first blow and second blow. There was no probing attack, no reconnaissance in force, no escalation, no signaling, none of the careful grammar of war that the old powers had spent 9,000 years perfecting. Earth did not open with a jab. Earth did not open at all. Earth simply put down in a single motion every single thing it had, everywhere it mattered at the same instant. And then it stood there, holding nothing back, with no reserve, no second wave, nothing left in the hand, and told the Draeven ascendancy exactly where it would strike next. The Ilthan choir, watching from a neutral relay, described it in a phrase that entered 40 languages, a species that had been holding its breath for 63 years and let it out. The ascendancy fought. They fought well, and they fought for 11 months, and they were not cowards and they were not fools. Their ships were good. Their crews were veterans. Their admirals were 2 centuries old, and they had won wars against 3 species and eaten the pieces. And they came at the human line at Ossier and at Kel Sharon, and in the long grinding horror of the Barrow Drift, with everything they had left after the rain took their yards. But they could not replace what they lost, and the humans could, and did, out of 41 shipyards inside a light year of ice that no Draeven vessel ever came within 400 light years of finding. And every fixed target got 72 hours. Every single one. The forges at Ossier, the drive works at Ren Caro, the command citadel at Vis. The great fleet anchorage in the rings of Thren, which had never in 800 years been fired upon, and which received a Terran broadcast in clear on the Ascendancy's own emergency channels, giving the hour, giving the radius, telling the civilians in the ring cities to move away from the naval moorings and take their families with them. It cost. God, it cost. Every warning bought a prepared defense. Every prepared defense bought a battle. Every battle bought a casualty list. Human losses at the anchorage at Thren were 9,000 dead in 4 hours, because the Ascendancy had used the 72 hours to mine the approaches and concentrate 4 fleets, and the human line went in anyway, into a killing ground of its own making, because a document said that 9 million Ring City civilians would be warned first, and the document did not have an exception in it. 19,000 human dead at Ren Caro. 31,000 at Vis. By the end of it, the human species had buried 141,000 of its children, most of them under 30, and had killed the Ascendancy's war machine down to its last dry dock, and had not once, not in 11 months, not in 91 separate strikes, hit a city. The galaxy watched. The galaxy could not look away. And what broke the old powers was not the fleet. It was the 72 hours. They had all understood from the first week that the humans could have ended it in a day if they were willing to strike unwarned. They had all done the modeling. Every admiralty in the assembly had run the numbers and seen that Earth was choosing, deliberately, over and over, to bleed its own young in exchange for the lives of the enemy's civilians. 900 delegations sat in the rings of light at Meridian Kell and watched a small species with a perfect compliance record hold a knife to a world's throat and then hand the world a clock. The Marosept, who had eaten 3 species, stopped making jokes in the 4th month. The end came at Draeven itself in the 11th month, and it came to Mira Kovan. She was a captain by then. She was 27 years old, and she had been in command of one ship or another for 340 days, and she had lost 211 people with her name on the orders, and she had a scar down the left side of her jaw from a splinter at Thren, and she did not, any longer, stand very still when she was angry, because she was no longer entirely certain what anger felt like. Consequence was her ship still. They had rebuilt her twice. The Ascendancy High Command had gone to ground in the citadel of Veen, a fortress moon in orbit of the Draeven homeworld, 1,100 kilometers of layered rock and armor and reactor, the single most heavily defended object in the known galaxy, and the last military asset the Ascendancy possessed. It sat 40,000 kilometers above a planet with 4 billion people on it. Earth broadcast Rule 3 at 600 on the 9th of the month, in clear in the Ascendancy's tongue on the Ascendancy's own channels. The target, the citadel of Veen and nothing else. The hour, 72 hours hence. The evacuation radius in kilometers with a map, and a note appended in plain language at the end. The world beneath is not a target. It will not be struck under any circumstance, including the circumstance of our own defeat. And Sarek Val, first marshal now, the last one left, answered it. He answered it on an open channel, and he addressed the human commander at the head of the blockade by name, because they had learned her name at Vihal Doran, and they had been learning it ever since. Captain Mira Kovan, this is Sarek Val. I have 9 ships. You have 2,000 in my sky. There is no outcome here. I understand that. My officers understand it. We will fight because we are what we are, and we will die in this rock, and you will not remember our names. But I will not go into the dark without telling you the truth, and you will listen, because you are the only one of your species who has been in a room with me twice. I fired on your barges at Sejuna. I gave that order, not a subordinate me. I gave it because I did not believe you existed, not you personally, your species, in the sense that a species exists as something that can do a thing. I had read your compliance filings for 40 years. I had counted your hulls. I had watched you sign our dockets and thank us for our diligence, and I had built an entire understanding of the universe on the certainty that a people who would sign those dockets would sign anything. Your ambassador stood on the black glass and told us that restraint could be spent. I heard her. I laughed. I told her not to come back. There was a long silence on the channel. 2,000 human ships waited in the sky of a hostile world. I have 4 billion people beneath me, Sarek Val said, and you have told them that they are not a target, and this is the part I cannot put down, Captain. This is the part that will go with me. They believe you. My own citizens. They have read your broadcast and they have not evacuated the homeworld because a human piece of paper told them they did not have to, and they trust it more than they trust me. 63 years I watched you bow your heads, and I thought I was watching cowards. What was I watching? Mira Kovan sat in her command chair in the smell of scorched insulation, and looked at a fortress moon with the last 9 ships of an empire hanging around it like leaves, and thought about a captain's hand flat on a command rail. and about 11,000 Draeven who had stayed at their posts at Vihal Doran, because this man recorded names, and about a woman on a barge who had wanted to know whether her son would see rain. She keyed the channel. "Marshal," she said, "you were watching people decide every single year for 63 years not to do this." She let that sit. "You want to know what changed? Nothing changed. That is the whole answer, and it's the only one you get. We are exactly what we always were. The restraint was not a mask over the fleet, and the fleet is not the truth under the mask. They are the same thing. The fleet is what our restraint was made of. That's why it was worth something. That's why it took 63 years to spend. You spent it. You did that. It took a great deal of doing, and you managed it, and here we are." Her voice did not rise. It never rose. "You have 72 hours minus 11, and then that moon comes apart. My orders are to accept your surrender at any point up to the last second, and to accept it from any officer, and to fire on nothing that is not the citadel itself. Your people beneath us will not be touched. Not by me, not by anyone in this fleet, not if you kill every ship I have. That is not mercy, Marshal. Don't mistake it for mercy. It is the last thing we have left that we're still willing to pay for." Sarek Val was quiet for 11 seconds. "And if I surrender," he said, "what becomes of me?" "You'll be tried," said Mira Kovan, "for Sejuna, before a conquered tribunal under conquered law with counsel on evidence in public. My captain's name will be read out, and so will 340 others, and so will 9,000 of yours." A pause. "It won't be satisfying, Marshal. Nothing about it will be satisfying. That's rather the point. The citadel of Veen surrendered at hour 69. Not Val. Val at the last could not do it, and locked himself in the command spire and would have gone down with the rock. But his own staff, 3 officers of the Ascendancy High Command with 2 centuries of service between them, put him under restraint and opened the docking bays and transmitted the codes with 11 hours left on the clock, and one of them said, on the open channel, in a voice that shook, "We are told your people give warnings. We are asking for 1 more hour." They got 3. Earth stopped. That was the thing the galaxy never quite believed, not even after it happened, not even with the evidence in front of it. Earth stopped. There were 2,000 human warships in the sky of the Draeven homeworld, and 11 million autonomous platforms in the systems beyond, and an industrial capacity in the Uit cloud that could have replaced every hull lost in the war within a year, and a defeated enemy with 4 billion people, and no fleet, and no forge, and no high command, lying open, undefended, entirely at the mercy of a species it had spent 6 decades humiliating. And Earth stopped at the line it had drawn on a piece of paper before the war began. The occupation force was 14,000 people, and half of them were engineers, and their orders were to disarm the yards and go home. The reparations were assessed by a conquered tribunal, and Earth accepted the tribunal's figure, which was lower than the one Earth had asked for. The 6 annexed worlds came back. The detained came home, living and dead, 3,100 living, which was more than anyone had dared hope. Sarek Val was tried at Meridian Kell in public for 11 months and convicted, and it was as unsatisfying as Mira Kovan had promised. And the fleet went back to sleep. That was written into the doctrine, on the last page, under everything once, and Earth executed it with the same appalling literalism it had brought to everything else. 3,200 hulls decommissioned in 4 years, under conquered observation, at the furnaces of Luna and Ceres, with the observers finally being shown what came out of the furnace. 31 of the 41 shipyards were broken up. The 3 weapons that could not discriminate were taken out of their silos and destroyed on camera, in front of 900 delegations, and the recording was 11 hours long, and nobody looked away. They kept 10 forges and 800 ships and made no secret of it, and no one in the 900 delegations ever asked them to keep fewer. Captain Mira Kovan came back to Meridian Kell 4 years after the war, at the age of 31 because the Assembly had asked for her, and because Teodora Wexley, who was old now, had written her a letter that said only, "They want to see what we are. Let them." They gave her the black glass at the bottom of the bowl, 900 delegations in rings of light above her, and not one of them making a sound, no dry chuckle, no joke in an untranslatable tongue, no warm, unbothered indifference. The Kessing Guild had sent its full delegation. The Marosept had sent its head of state. The Ilthan choir did not sing. She stood there in a plain uniform with a scar down her jaw, and she did not bring paper because she did not need it. "The human species has been asked," she said, "to explain itself." It was asked, specifically, how it built a fleet for 63 years while pleading for justice in this chamber, and whether every word humanity spoke here in that time was a lie. The answer is no, not one word. Everything we said here was true. We wanted the law to work. We used it every year to the last day. We wanted the rulings to be honest, and we obeyed them when they were not. We wanted, more than the Assembly will ever understand, to be a species that never had to open that book, and every ship we built in the ice was built by people who prayed they would die before it was launched. They did not get their wish, neither did we. Her voice was flat and pleasant and absolutely level. 141,000 of my people are dead, 9,000 of theirs, 2 of my captains and 211 of my crew, whose names I can give you in order and will, if any delegation would like to hear them. This is what you must understand, and it is the only thing I came here to say. You did not miss a warning. You heard it. It was read aloud in this room, all 3 pages of it, with the dates and the coordinates and the 14,311 names, and you laughed, and you told our ambassador not to come back, and she did not come back because we are a species that says a thing once. We are not proud of what came after. We will not be doing it again. The machine is in the furnace and the paper is in the archive. And if 100 years from now some human government comes to this floor and threatens what we threatened, I hope this Assembly will remember that we destroyed those weapons in front of you on purpose, so that our own grandchildren would have to look at the recording. But we will not pretend it was an accident either. It was a choice. It was made slowly, and it was made in daylight, and you were all told. So here is the last of it, and then Earth will sit down and be quiet for a long time, which is what it is good at. Restraint is not weakness. It is a debt somebody is carrying for you. Every year that a strong people bows its head, it is not because it cannot lift it. It is because it has decided again that the cost of lifting it is too high, and that decision has to be made fresh every single morning, by every single one of them, and any one of them can stop. You had 63 years of hours. You were given the bill in advance, in writing in this room. Read the next one. She stepped down off the black glass, and 900 species watched a 31-year-old woman walk up the grand stair, 91 steps, in complete silence. And every delegation in that chamber in that moment understood that the galaxy had not been spared because it deserved to be, but because a small, patient, terrible people had written down where they would stop, and then had kept their word at a price no one else in 9,000 years had ever been willing to pay. She did not hurry, she did not look back. At the top of the stair, Teodora Wexley was waiting with her hands folded, old and gray and unhurried, and she said, very quietly, as the doors opened onto the light, "Was it enough?" "No," said Mira Kovan, "it never is." And then she went home to a world